Hey, and welcome back to the clubhouse. Superman the movie is the archetype for all MCU origin films. Kevin Feige stated that they watch it before making any MCU film. I wanted to put that claim to the test and analyze how much Superman can be seen in the MCU movies. Join me today in the clubhouse as we talk about the amazing journey of the MCU, its highs, its lows, and all of it through the lens of finding Superman. Today we are going to look at a trio of Phase 1 origin movies, Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor. We will do separate episodes on Avengers as it's a team-up movie, Iron Man 2 because it is a sequel, and The Incredible Hulk. I know The Incredible Hulk isn't technically a sequel, but it doesn't really fit as an origin film either. Before we dive into these three films, let's provide some context. You know me, I love my context. A lot of this information comes from the Rob Liefeld podcast, Robservations. Love him or hate him, his podcast is a treasure trove of comics history. In the 1990s, Marvel was a comics juggernaut, eclipsing sales records with first Spider-Man, then X-Force, and finally X-Men. But by 1996, the company had declared bankruptcy due to taking on too much of a debt load. The president of Marvel at the time, Ron Perlman, used the income generated by the comic side of Marvel to purchase toy companies, trading card companies, a sticker company, and a comics distribution company. The rapid growth led to an increased debt load that would be too much for the softening comic sales to support, leading to their company declaring bankruptcy. To be clear, the comics still sold incredibly well, especially the two flagship franchises, X-Men and Spider-Man. As a means to increase revenue, Marvel sold the cinematic rights to their higher profile characters to different studios. Fox purchased X-Men, Daredevil, and Fantastic Four, while Sony purchased Spider-Man. Universal also purchased the Hulk. Marvel recovered from the bankruptcy, and Fox and Sony started pumping out superhero movies. In the year 2000, Fox's X-Men was released in theaters. I remember seeing it in theaters and being blown away at how cool it looked, but a little disappointed by the lack of colorful costumes. In 2002, Spider-Man came out and further blew down the door that X-Men had opened. These two films created the superhero genre explosion. Soon there was a Daredevil movie, an Elektra movie, two Fantastic Four films, prequels and sequels to X-Men and Spider-Man, a rebooted Batman, a quasi-sequel to Superman, and a plethora of other films, each receiving varying levels of success and acclaim. Marvel created Marvel Studios to capitalize on the superhero mania, but they had a number of stumbling blocks. First, they didn't have the rights for their most well-known characters. And without those characters, they couldn't raise the investment capital to create the film. So in 2006, they rebranded the Avengers comic as The New Avengers and added their two most popular characters to the team, Spidey and Wolverine. They then coupled them with top writer Brian Michael Bendis and fantastic artist David Finch. The comic soon became one of the top-selling comics of the year, and all of a sudden, an Avengers property was selling like hotcakes. This increased their valuation and led to more investors being willing to take a risk on Avengers properties. So with funding in hand, newly christened Marvel Studios went about creating their own superhero movie. To direct, they tapped Jon Favreau, who had directed a number of smaller movies prior to Iron Man and one classic Christmas movie called Elf. To star as Tony Stark, they cast Robert Downey Jr., whose promising career had been derailed by multiple struggles with addictions, incarcerations, and court-ordered rehabs. But something incredible happened in 2008. Iron Man was really, really good. In one of the best superhero movie summers of all time, Iron Man and The Dark Knight were released to pretty much unanimous acclaim. The entire Marvel Studios endeavor depended upon the success of this film. If it failed, there just wasn't going to be enough money to try again. But its success gave birth to one of the most impressive long-form narratives in cinematic history. Now, that was a very brief rundown of Marvel's financial troubles, the rise of the superhero cinema genre, and the success of Iron Man 1. But let's get down to the main course. Last video, I stated what I believe are the core aspects of Superman the movie's legacy in cinema. Let's see how well Iron Man, Captain America, the First Avenger, and Thor hold up the legacy of Superman. First, verisimilitude. Are these three movies portraying the characters in an earnest and sincere manner? Do they show a respect to the characters' worlds and the source material? Second, core of the character. Do these three movies understand who the protagonists are at their core? Third, substance over spectacle. Are these movies strictly action set pieces, or do they portray a human story propelled by action? And fourth, structure of an origin. Do they follow the structure of an origin movie as laid out by Superman the movie? Taken together, the three movies show a sincere look at the world these characters live in. I think of Thor when he is discussing magic with Jane. There is no silliness in his explanation, just a sincere and touching discussion of how his magical realm can exist in a world dominated by science. This is such an important part of the Marvel Universe. Up till now, the movies had only portrayed the science fiction aspects of Marvel. Thor was the first to delve into the magical world under the guise of super advanced science. In Captain America, we get a scene where Captain America rescues the platoon of soldiers from Schmidt's factory. The rescued soldiers gather around him and unashamedly cheer on and salute their hero, Captain America, by name. Both of these scenes fully embrace how outlandish their characters are, but there isn't any attempt by the director to wink at us and let us know that it's all silly, and we are too cool for them. Now, there are some moments where certain characters make remarks about Captain America's costume or name prior to the rescue, but it still feels sincere because of the world that director Joe Johnston created. Because the surrounding characters go from deriding him to celebrating him, we as an audience also get to take part in that journey. Similarly, Thor has a character named Darcy, who is too cool for this nonsense character. But it works because of the rest of the cast is so heavily invested in making the world seem real. Iron Man, from start to finish, is the most firmly grounded in earnestness. We believe that a character like Tony Stark could exist because Jon Favreau and Robert Downey Jr. convince us of it throughout the movie. While it is replete with humor, it never laughs at itself. That was something I noticed as well watching these movies. They each have a drastically different feel. The Marvel humor of later movies is only really evident in Iron Man. Thor and Captain America have their funny moments, but the humor is more reflective of the types of movie they are and the characters they represent. Second, do they understand the core of the characters? While the MCU has taken liberties with the source material, these early movies succeeded because they understood the core of who their characters were. Tony and Thor both start in similar places. They are the best at what they do. They are arrogant, but not evil. They are selfish and flawed, but again, not evil. They have the means, but not the desire to be heroes. Steve starts from the opposite end. He is inherently selfless, virtuous, but he's laughably incompetent. He has the heart of a hero, but no means. This dynamic sets up much of the drama and stakes of the rest of the Infinity Saga. I believe that in spite of the liberties taken in these movies with the source material, they do understand the characters at their core in a way that Superman the movie did in 1978. So, who is Tony at his core? He's an arrogant man with a good heart who is seeking redemption. Who is Steve? A brave man trying to do what he can to help people. The most similar to Superman in the MCU. And who is Thor? Thor is an arrogant warrior god who falls in love with Midgard and its inhabitants and is willing to sacrifice to protect them. In Iron Man, Tony and Pepper fight over what he is doing. He is so obsessed with righting the wrongs of his company that he is willing to sever relationships to do it. He is still arrogant in his beliefs, but his heart is demanding that he work to end the suffering he has caused. In Captain America, we see scenes of Steve getting beat up as he tries to stand up for others. And when he interviews with Erskine, he is asked if he wants to kill Nazis. Steve responds that he has no right not to be doing any less than the soldiers in Europe and the Pacific to help the war effort. This culminates in him abandoning his performing show to stage a rescue mission deep behind enemy lines. And Thor faces down the destroyer when he is depowered. This reflects his character's growth and the core ideals of Thor. He is a warrior, first and foremost, but through the movie he learns what he needs to fight for. Substance over spectacle. Now, there is plenty of spectacle in these movies, but to be true to the legacy of Superman the movie, the substance has to be more important than the spectacle. Thankfully, because the movies earnestly portray these characters as well-rounded individuals, it is easy to see that there is substance to them. Iron Man is clearly in the lead with substance as it grapples pretty well with Tony's arc of redemption. Captain America gets a little lost in the spectacle of World War II as the second half of the movie offers limited character development aside from two key moments that save it. The first moment is the death of Bucky, and the second moment is Steve talking to Sharon as he puts the bomber into the ocean. Both of these moments are flawed in the movie. The death of Bucky doesn't resonate as much as it would have if it had been the Red Skull facing them in the conflict rather than a nameless goon. And Steve putting the plane down seems forced, as Steve is portrayed as a brilliant strategist who should have been able to come up with an alternative. Now, I was torn on Thor, but in the end, I think there is enough emphasis on a human story behind Thor. It's difficult to watch the movie in a vacuum without thinking about what Chris Hemsworth would become as the character. I don't think the MCU has done the Thor character justice in any of their movies. Maybe it's the direction that Kevin Feige wanted the character to go in, or maybe it's the casting, or I'm not completely sure, but the movies that he is the title character on just do not have as good a handle on Thor as a character. The single best moment of Thor in the MCU is his arrival in Wakanda looking for Thanos from Infinity War. It's frustrating because the core of the character is there, but they just don't seem to do anything to build on it in a meaningful way. As far as just the first Thor movie is concerned, though, it establishes enough substance that they could have made something very cool with it. Now, the structure of Superman the movie is very briefly as followed. There's a status quo, there's a major event to rock the status quo, there's a journey of discovery and training, there's introduction of the hero, there's a montage of heroic acts, a romantic introduction, arrival of the prime antagonist, failure, overcoming obstacles, and the introduction of a new status quo. In Iron Man, we see that Jon Favreau follows this structure very closely. We start with a major event that rocks the status quo, but then we are taken back via flashback to his status quo. We are shown that he is selfish, greedy, an alcoholic, a sex addict, and very toxic. This is all masterfully portrayed with a charm and humor that shows us the deep flaws of the character without causing us to hate him. We then see the kidnapping, torture, and realization of what his flaws have led to. In the midst of his despair, he forms a human connection, and then it is taken from him. This leads him to a journey of discovery with the creation of the suits and his return to life. His romantic interests begin to come forward, as do his heroic acts, destroying the true antagonist, Obadiah Stane. Their initial confrontation leads to Tony Stark's defeat, but gradually he overcomes his obstacles and one of his flaws to defeat the villain and start a new status quo. In Captain America, the status quo is established of him being unfit to help the war effort in Europe. His characters established his perseverance. He is a bit of an outcast with only one real human connection, being Bucky. His status quo is changed when he enters the program to become a super soldier. He trains and displays his heroic nature, and it is rocked even more when Hydra kills Dr. Erskine in the midst of their success. We then see him discover his new powers. His discovery and training are short-lived as he is forced into a position that doesn't allow him to be the hero he desires. After this brief montage, he again shows his heroic nature by saving the soldiers, which also acts as a journey of discovery for him and puts him face to face with the true antagonist, who he fails to capture. We then get the montage of him being heroic while his romantic relationship with Sharon deepens. His second failure comes with the death of his best friend Bucky, but we don't get a satisfying confrontation with the Red Skull except for at the end. He overcomes his failures and defeats the villain while sacrificing himself, introducing a new status quo. If I could tweak this movie, it would be to make the Red Skull more menacing by having him defeat Bucky and Steve, leading to Bucky's death, and Steve only surviving because of the super soldier serum. In Thor, the status quo is established as he is a warrior heir of Asgard. His status quo is shaken when enemies break into the realm and he seeks revenge for their crimes. Due to his flaws, he is cast out, weaponless and powerless. His journey of discovery isn't so much training, but rather discovering what life is like without his powers, and discovering a reason to fight. The introduction of Thor as the hero comes from him revealing the heroic nature within himself, and I would argue that this occurs with him helping the humans learn of him and his people to support their research. Thus, the heroic montage is him with the people of Midgard. The return of his powers is only granted when his heart has been changed and he is willing to fight and die for them. During Thor's growth on Midgard, Loki is revealed to us as the real antagonist of the film. Thereby, Thor must defeat Loki's destroyer and then face Loki himself. Thor is an interesting case and probably strays the most from the Superman movie archetype and structures, but still maintains the primary tropes. He shows acts of heroism, he develops a romance, he fails in his first attempt to resolve the conflict, he faces Loki and the Destroyer, and after defeating both of them settles into a new status quo. Now, none of these three movies are a perfect carbon copy of Superman the movie's structure, but it is very easy to see that it was the blueprint for them. After having analyzed the three movies, it is very apparent that the legacy of Superman is all over the MCU. The Phase 1 origin movies embraced a verisimilitude for the worlds and the source material. They showcased the core characteristics of each of these characters to an extent. They attempted to prioritize substance over spectacle, and they followed the basic origin structure as used in Superman the movie. That's not to say that each of these movies were amazing, but they do uphold Feige's comment about using Superman the movie as the archetype. And while they weren't all amazing, I believe their adherence to Superman the movie as that archetype is one of the primary reasons the MCU became so successful, and why later installments in the MCU, Phase 5 and 6, have not resonated with fans. Thank you so much for joining me, and see you back at the clubhouse real soon.